Hello, everybody.
Hello.
So, for those of you who don't already know us so well, I am Ken,
I'm Hannah.
and we are now the podcast formerly known as Wisdom Save. So, for those of you who didn't see our intro episode yesterday, that's not going to make sense out of context.
It won't matter for them.
Yeah, an indiscriminate amount of time ago. We are kind of starting our own little podcast to talk about some things that interest us, just kind of have fun conversations about nerd fandom stuff and probably spooky stuff if
Just stuff that interests us.
yeah. But so this is kind of our first official episode. Um so, welcome to everybody who's listening. Did you want to talk about what our topic plan is as an intro into?
I mean, not really, because the topics are going to be secret, so we're not going to tell them what it's about. But the first episode, or I guess technically we talked about it yesterday, but we're going to go back and forth on different topics. We're going to start with Ken. We're going to go to me the second day, and then the third day, or I guess it'd technically be weeks. It doesn't.
Yeah, we're thinking weekly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we're going to go back and forth, and then we'll either have an episode that we collab on, or we'll have an episode that we get guests in on, I guess, depending on if our friends and family want to join in on different things.
Ooh, we're already talking about guest stars. Okay.
But no, today is our first, or technically second, but technically first episode, and we're going to start off with something Ken wants to talk about.
Our first official episode. So since we're kind of doing a back and forth thing, we figured we would start with a topic that is, well, we kind of were going to do topics that were interesting to each of us to kind of go over the things that interest us and kind of introduce the other person to something. But I kind of bucked the system a little bit.
Okay.
'Cause you actually know a decent bit about this general topic.
Okay.
We're just kind of we're doing a little bit of a deep dive into some stuff you may not know about that topic.
All right.
So, Hannah.
Yes.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how much of a fan of Dungeons and Dragons would you say that you are?
I like 10. I like Dungeons.
Yeah.
I like Dungeons and Dragons.
So, okay, then this is going to be a lovely conversation. So I know, mainly because, I'm pretty sure I was the one who got you into it.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I've heard about Dungeons and Dragons before you asked me to join the campaign that we're in right now, but I always, thought it was, some musty old game from, the 70s and 80s, and I was like, it's just a bunch of wizards jacking each other off. So I didn't want to actually play. But, lo and behold, that's not what it is, so...
Yeah. So
I mean, it can be, but it's not normal.
Sure. That's the magic of it, though, is that it can be kind of whatever you want it to be.
Uh-huh.
So interesting that you mention that you thought it was some musty old game from the 70s or 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Because, to my knowledge, you got into the game with the campaign that we started almost 6 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
So that would mean that you have only ever played 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons.
That's true.
So I don't have that much more of a history. I did skip out on 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons, mainly because the people that I was introduced to the game with 12 years ago now, they didn't like 4th edition at all, and we pretty much exclusively played 3rd edition, or specifically 3.5.
And speaking for people who don't know, I mean, I guess if you're listening to this, you probably know what D&D is, but speaking for the people who don't, the editions are technically just revisions of the game through time to make it more updated, even though some of them didn't actually do that.
Well, some of them, they did, and, the best way to describe the individual editions of Dungeons and Dragons is that, if you, like if you're playing any sort of game, like whether it be like an old like Nintendo or PlayStation classic or like an old board game or something like that. Eventually, after you play the same old game for like 10, 15 years, it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, okay, I kind of know what's going on here. Um,
It's almost like generations of Pokemon. It's like first edition is like yellow, and then
yeah,
like
yeah.
second edition would be like red and blue, and then third edition would be like uh whatever the fuck came after that.
Wait. Well, gold and silver were second, and then like ruby and sapphire, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, it's kind of like that. The additions serve, and like this is my perspective on it. I don't really know what the Wizards of the Coast company perspective on the edition shifts is. But editions serve to both kind of like reinvent the game in a new way, both to make it engaging and appealing to new players who maybe don't know what the game is. Fifth edition was kind of a good example of that, like being able to reprint the player's handbook and monster manual in a new and like exciting and eye-catching way to like draw new players in who like maybe wouldn't have played fourth edition because they look at it and they're like, oh, it looks like a miniature wargaming tabletop game. That's not really my thing.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like reinventing the idea of the game while also like kind of addressing like, oh, I don't really like that this works this way in the game, and so they change it. But editions have kind of always been a thing when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay.
They're constantly updating it, and you'll especially see as we talk about the history of the game, where it all started, and how like things shifted over the course of the editions. You'll see how, like, especially very early on, they were just making so many constant adjustments to the game, mostly because it was like a bunch of dudes playing in their basement,
Mm-hmm.
and being like, that sucks. Let's do this different. Scratching out pages in a notebook and then like posting it to
Right, that's like technically what first edition was. It was
kind
like
of,
just the
yeah.
people who made it in their basement playing the game and making up their own rules.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so our topic for today, I guess, to formally introduce it, is sort of a walkthrough of the history of the different editions of Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay.
Um, Talking about, now this one's going to be definitely angled more towards like the D&D fans. I'm going to talk about a lot of stuff that like Dungeons and Dragons players will be able to recognize. But maybe people who don't know too much about the game might not be able to pick up on. I will try my best to
Mm-hmm.
explain things. Um, but in general, I feel like it's going to be enough to like kind of go along and see like where things ended up. So if you've ever had a passing fascination in Dungeons and Dragons like the two of us do, um, there's a lot of interesting historical tidbits in here. So,
Okay.
first edition.
Ugh.
A lot of people feel that way too, and like, and honestly, me as well. In doing research for this, I kind of was like, oh, okay, I get it. But like, it definitely feels like a very like old world, like dusty, like kind of stained yellow page fantasy novel you found at a tag sale kind of feel to it.
Well, see, that's the thing, is because fifth edition seems like the shiny, like polished gem of it all. And it's like, I've heard people talk about playing 3.5 because no one wanted to play 4, apparently, because it was bad. But,
Yeah,
so I've heard people talk about
sure.
3.5, and the only thing I ever hear is that it was, like, so broken that you could just be a superhero.
Yeah.
So anything beyond that, I'm like, it must have just been god awful. Like, if the most recent edition that was good before the, like, air quotes, perfected 5th edition.
Sure.
How could it have been even playable?
So, like, the weird thing about the different editions is because they make such kind of like in some of the editions, not in all of them, but in some of them they made such like, especially to certain aspects of the game, such like catastrophic overhaul. Maybe catastrophic isn't the right word. That sounds kind of doom and gloom. Such massive like overhauls and changes to like some of the basic structures of the game.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of ways, like different pros and cons popped up that wouldn't necessarily, like, there are elements, for example, of second edition Dungeons and Dragons that exist like fairly prominently in fifth edition,
Right.
and just like in third and fourth they weren't really like that big of a thing, or like the game mechanics changed in such a way that they weren't emphasized, and they
Right.
kind of like came back. The reason why a lot of people seem to like fifth edition, I'm speaking generally, but from what I hear, a lot of people switched over to fifth edition. The majority of people that I see on like forums and like in my local playing groups and things like that, um, they switched over to fifth edition because fifth edition kind of did an overall pretty good job of taking some of the best elements of other editions of the game and putting them together in a way that was like cohesive but not self-destructive.
Okay.
Um, that was, we'll get to third edition, but third
Anyway,
edition's
first
first
edition.
edition Dungeons and Dragons. So back in ye old time of 1974.
Okay, so I was right
Um,
about the 70s.
oh yeah, you were right. Um, a gentleman whose name has been carved into the annals of history, one Mr. Gary Gygax. Him and his play group, a bunch of gentlemen whose names I don't want to butcher, so
Okay,
I'll just
okay.
refer to them as his friends,
Okay.
Gygax and friends.
His gentleman.
His gentlemen. Um, they mostly were
What gentleman?
the gentlemen. They mostly were like doing what you would expect of your average like 1970s gaming group. They had like a big war maps and terrain set up on huge tables in their basement, like notebooks upon notebooks of graph paper just stacked up everywhere, playing like old school like squadron figurines and tank figurines rolling across battle maps and like doing like war gaming math. Everyone was a war gamer back then. There
Okay.
wasn't really before
Like Risk.
kind of, but like almost to a more extreme degree. Like everyone had their figures, but the figures represented like entire squadrons or armies,
Okay.
and it was very much like a country conquering country or nation conquering nation kind of like game.
All right.
Um, there wasn't really a concept yet of a like tabletop role playing game
Right.
before Dungeons and Dragons. It was pretty much all just like wargaming and like just like strategy gaming, things like that. You didn't really jump into the skin of a character.
Right.
Maybe you had a commander or a general who was a vague personality that had mechanical benefits, but it wasn't like you were not playing a person.
You're
You,
playing like a nation.
yeah, nation, a country, an army, a group of warriors.
Okay.
There was a couple of early steps into this. There was a war game that Gygax and Gentlemen were quite fond of at that time called Chainmail.
Okay.
Chainmail, to my understanding, did things a little bit differently than your average war game. It was still a war game. You were still leading like medieval armies, knights, and like a barbarian tribes, things like that into open battle. But their the figures represented like leaders or like influential characters, each with their own independent stats, and you could kind of like customize those characters a little bit. It was like the early RPG elements of a tabletop.
Like the very earliest version of a player character.
Yeah, kind of. Um, so Gygax and Gentlemen kind of took this idea, and also at the time, as were a lot of like nerds who played games in their basements,
Mm-hmm.
very into like Tolkienian novels, that style of fantasy novels, but specifically Tolkien. I mean, everyone liked Lord of the Rings.
Everyone still likes Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, it's kind of like that classic archetypal fantasy, like not medieval fantasy, but like high fantasy kind of.
Well, I can only imagine that's why it became so intertwined with their war game.
Well, exactly, and that's kind of where it all came from. There's a lot of roundabout to it, and like a lot of like things that led up to this, but it kind of started with the idea of what if we took chainmail, like what if we took the game, and what if we just like made it Tolkien.
Okay.
What if we just did like Lord of the Rings chainmail, but like kind of put our own spin on it?
Right.
And that was
where it starts to sound fun.
Yeah, that was basic. Right, exactly. Yeah, because I mean, I couldn't have seen myself if I was back in that day. I don't think I'd be the kind of person who was like, rolling tanks around like a jagged terrain battle map. But like, you give me a cool wizard with a big staff full of crystals, and
that's the thing. I'm all for war games.
I'm in.
I really like strategy games of all kinds, but like, you gotta give me characters to play with, otherwise I don't give a fuck. Like, I'm not... like, I want to play Fire Emblem for sure.
Yep.
But when you start, like, giving me all those characters, or if you, like, took my characters away, or give me, like, characters that are just bland, and you're like, well, here's your army, and, like, here, do something with them. It's like, I don't care about these guys.
Yeah. This guy's a sword master. He doesn't have a personality, but he's got a really high crit rate. You're like, meh.
It's cool, but nah.
Yeah, exactly. But like you add a little spice to each of the individual characters, and it's like you're in. Yeah, I'm the same way. That's why I tend to prefer tabletop role playing games over like pretty much any other type of tabletop gaming. Even as much of a like trading card gamer as I am, like it's just if there's no story, I'm not interested.
Okay.
But it's the same basic thing. They kind of had this idea, so they cobbled up this like pulled out a notebook, grabbed a pen, like just started jotting down ideas, and over the course of a reasonable period of time, I think still within 1974, I think that was when all this kind of was like the ideas were forming. They jotted down the first version of what would come to be referred to as OD&D.
Original D&D.
Original Dungeons and Dragons, yeah. The official, first edition wouldn't technically be until Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which is it's still first edition. It comes a little bit later, but, the very early rule set was, bare bones. Here is what you could do. The number of playable races in OD&D, in Gygax's early OD&D.
Let me guess, it was...
Oh, yeah, go for it.
It was 3. I want to say it was 3.
3, okay. What do you
think? Human, elf, and dwarf.
You got 3 of them. There's still one more.
Still one more?
Think Tolkien.
Could you be an orc?
Not orcs. Orcs weren't in there yet.
Did they make wizard or race or something like that?
No. Oh, like Gandalf. Oh, that's smart. I didn't think about that. They very well could have, but they didn't.
I don't know.
So
fucking shit. Whatever the heck.
Bilbo.
Yeah, whatever he was. Halflings?
So Dungeons and Dragons players will know this race as the Halfling. Halfling is named as such because they legally couldn't use the word hobbit because it belongs to Tolkien. I like
Halfling better anyway.
I like Halfling better too. That being said, in OD&D, they were hobbits.
Okay.
Because just straight up, they're like, we're playing this at my house, so
I'm just gonna get the little TM.
Yeah, I'm just gonna write hobbit, and we're good. So hobbits were the 4th playable race in the game.
So there were 4.
There were 4. Yep, humans, dwarves, elves, hobbits. Things like goblins. Orcs, the kind of archetypal they're player races now, but back then they were pretty much exclusively used as monster races.
Right.
They weren't playable yet. They existed. They
weren't playable till recently.
Well, I mean, they were playable as early as some were playable as early as 2nd edition, late 2nd edition.
Okay.
Some not till 3rd. Third was kind of where like third edition is where like the concept of like player races and species that you can be now. That's like that kind of got set in stone then.
All
But
right.
early on, it was like very minimal. Like you kind of just wanted to play people who were in the Fellowship of the Ring,
Right.
so you only needed those races. There weren't any orcs in Frodo's band, so why
No
would you want to
orcs.
play an orc?
All right.
Yeah, that kind of thing. How many classes do you think were playable?
Oh God, wizard, just everyone's a wizard. They probably had like ranger,
Okay.
fighter,
Okay.
wizard,
Okay.
acrobat. no. No, ranger, fighter, wizard. That's all I can really think they'd probably have put in. But there's 4 races, so they at least had to have 4 classes. No?
No, maybe not.
What? Those are my guesses.
There were 3.
Ranger, fighter, wizard.
There were 3 playable. Why now? Interesting. Why do you say ranger?
Ranger?
Yeah.
Because elves and like the bows and stuff.
Right. Okay.
Like I'm thinking Legolas.
Yeah.
Like
totally reasonable.
He wasn't really like a ranger. He was kind of a ranger.
I think Legolas would be a ranger or maybe a fighter in like 5th edition. Probably a ranger.
Yeah.
But the concept of what a ranger was back then is very different.
Okay.
Than what a ranger is now. Technically speaking, did you say cleric?
No, I didn't say cleric.
You didn't say cleric. Technically speaking, you didn't get any of them right.
What?
But only technically speaking. Because the wizard was not...
What, was he like a sorcerer?
No, it wasn't sorcerer. The 3 classes, what we now know to be the fighter...
Acrobat.
Not quite. That would be dope, though. What we now know to be the fighter was referred to back then as, I'm not kidding, the fighting man.
The fighting man.
Yes, the fighting man. If you were a fighting man, it meant that you were good at weapons.
Okay.
Just like anything Dungeons and Dragons that you can think of that like used weapons, you were a fighting man. Were you a stealthy warrior who snuck around the battlefield and stabbed your opponent with knives? Fighting man with knives.
Oh my God.
Were you like a talented, peerless archer who climbed up into the treetops and rained down arrows upon their enemy? Fighting man with a bow.
That's so dumb.
Yeah, that was it. Like literally every weapon wielding class, fighting man.
Fighting man.
Then there was, of course, the cleric.
Okay.
If you were a follower of a god who like received divine power and blessing through them, you were a cleric. Pretty much exactly the same, not exactly the same, but pretty much similar to the way that it's perceived in modern Dungeons and Dragons. A cleric is a cleric.
Mm-hmm.
And the last one, that which we now know to be the wizard, was referred to as a magic user. They did exactly what they said. They used magic.
Okay.
Magic users back then were like, when they obtained enough levels to gain access to higher tier spells, they effectively became gods. And you will find that a lot of the early wizard characters that are like etched into like the mythos of their first setting, which Gary Gygax's setting was the Greyhawk setting, which was pretty common in earlier editions, not so much in 5th edition. But their world of Greyhawk, like all of their wizard characters, basically just like called the shots.
Okay.
Because they could kind of just bend time and space to their will.
Awesome. Not overpowered at all. That's
right.
Really cool.
Well, that kind of continues to be a problem, and we'll see how that spreads through. But very early on, you had one trick, and then you were worthless. Like really early level magic users could do like magic missile once a day. And then once you did that, the only thing you could do is either hide behind a box or like pray, because like
so they were kind of like warlocks, pretty much.
Sort of, yeah. Like you were a wizard. The idea of like wizards having like any weapon proficiencies. Like, maybe you could use a quarterstaff vaguely well, but your melee attack bonus was garbage.
Right, and your health was probably still bad.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you couldn't hold a candle to a wind. Stiff breeze knocks you over and hit your head on a rock and die.
Took sitting damage.
Yep, 1d4 sitting damage for sitting down too hard on a chair. Your spine pops to the top of your head. Roll a new character. But yeah, basically, they started off really, really weak, and that was, I guess, kind of the justification for why they became like
So powerful.
like time and space altering semi deities who controlled like several of them went on like deep dives into mega dungeons in Greyhawk and like freed gods from their prisons and like became friends with them and stuff. That was like, there's a whole mythos of Gary Gygax's storylines and how that plays into like the lore of the Greyhawk campaign setting.
Okay.
But it's basically just like him and his friends' adventures from back in the 70s got turned into like a whole like world that people play and enjoy, which is it's kind of neat. It's like a walk through history.
I've heard a little bit about Greyhawk.
You as a Critical Role fan, a lot of like Vecna, like the concept of the character Vecna.
Yeah.
His history is tied to like Gygax's like first adventuring party. Like, one of his character. Gary Gygax's character is like he had a wizard character. I'm blanking on the name and I'm going to feel like such a moron. No, it wasn't Vecna. He had a wizard character who's like one of the most famous characters. Like they're still around. People talk. Oh, I'm pretty sure like his character was Mordenkainen.
Oh.
I'm pretty sure that was like him. I might be wrong.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure that's like...
I couldn't tell you one way or the other.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's like his wizard. Like he's like
I just knew he wrote the Tome of Foes.
He did write a Tome of Foes. He's written like a lot of books.
Tome of things that could hurt me.
Yeah, Tome of scary bad people. But yeah, so basically, the first couple of years of this like bootleg version of the game was mostly played in Gary's basement with his friends. He'd invite everybody over like on weekends or like days they had off. They'd just like, eat snacks and hang out and play his homebrew game, just like,
normal DnD.
Yeah, we all do now, but like, it wasn't really like a thing. Eventually, like, he kind of wrote up the concept of Greyhawk as a world, and like the world of Orth, Oert, which it sounds like Earth, but it's like I think it's pronounced Orth.
Earth.
Somebody flame me in the comments if it's not, but But that pretty much went on. He wrote up his whole supplement about Greyhawk and like added in a bunch of like the early mega dungeons. A lot of
like that spooky one they do for Halloween, the Dungeon of
the Tomb of Horrors.
Yeah,
that was written by Gary Gygax, exactly. And like that famous character of Asararak, the Lich, who runs the Tomb of Horrors. That was kind of his creation. But early D&D was very much centered around mega dungeons.
Right.
Like, you would have, like...
There wasn't a lot of role play. There was more just you went into dungeons, you hit people with sticks, or you hid behind a chair, and then you...
Oh, and there was definitely some role playing, but it was mostly done in the form of, like, big, dramatic moments.
Mm-hmm.
Like, things that would really capture the attention of a reader if you were reading through like a Tolkien novel or something like that. Like big moments that changed the overarching like sphere of history of the campaign setting they were building.
Okay.
But mostly they just kind of like had to go off on a quest into a dungeon somewhere. The dungeon was like hundreds and hundreds of rooms long with traps down every hallway. Regularly, like they would go in and party members would wipe, just be completely obliterated by like traps and horrible monsters that dwelled within the dungeon, and then they'd roll up new characters and go back in and go fish their old ones' bodies out, get them resurrected, things like that. So they could kind of keep playing with their characters like throughout the course of history. But like, I mean, these mega dungeons kind of, to my understanding, sometimes took like months, years to complete the dungeon. And like there were always like the gods that created the world were locked in the basement by some powerful entity, and you set them free, and now that changes something about the world, or like gives you access to a new power. Things like that. It wasn't until about 3 years later, in 1977 when we started to see the production of like actual rule books. The game started to kind of pick up steam. People were talking about it. Like they would go to conventions that were local and be playing this game, and people were like, "Ooh, what's that? That's really fascinating."
Mm-hmm.
And so like it kind of picked up steam. People started talking about it on a more national level, to the degree that they were able to kind of like build up enough funds and resources to put some actual rule books and like mechanics to the printing presses.
Okay.
They had like a piss poor budget. We're talking like they hired a bunch of like they hired a bunch of their friends and like local artists they knew to like, can you just draw us something to put into this book? And like royalties were like, you'll get like, if we sell 100 copies of this book, we'll send you like $2, and then like every other 100 copies will send you $2 more. That's like royalties for the rest of your life. It was like that was the kind of budget they were working with. But eventually, starting around then and leading into like 1979,
Okay.
was when we saw the printing of what we now know to be the core three: Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual.
Okay.
Those were, I think, the first Monster Manual was called like the Monstrous Compendium or something.
Something like that.
Yeah, something way fancier, but basically meaning the same thing. Along with those rule books, the game went through several more like iterations and changes that kind of
Spiced it up.
yeah, like spiced it up and like added new options for you. Namely, they got, oh, there was another thing we didn't talk about. There were in like later revisions of it, they kind of changed, like they were like, oh well, it doesn't make sense that this race like can do this thing because they all all like it was like very Tolkienian, like all elves of this type live in the woods and they use bows, so all elves do that. So it was like elves, like you couldn't play an elf cleric. It like wasn't a thing. You couldn't play a dwarf wizard or a magic user. It wasn't a thing. Same thing with hobbits, who by this point, once 79 rolled around, they were now referred to as halflings. Once they printed the books, hobbits are out.
Had to change it.
Absolutely. To go along with that, very early on, they added in a fourth class, because, I mean, The Hobbit is all about all of these dwarves coming and knocking on Bilbo's door because they needed a robber.
Okay.
They needed someone who could steal a treasure from the dragon. So they figured thieves. Thieves should be, so they added the thief, not the rogue yet.
The thief.
The thief as a player class. That was the fourth class. Eventually, they added in a variation of certain classes. If your character had the right stats in the right places, they could kind of deviate from their class a little bit and like specialize in certain skills. And this was the game's first attempt at what we now know as subclasses.
Okay.
But like straight up classes were kind of subclasses at this point. For example, when AD&D came out, like officially in 1979, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, like the like official first edition, you saw two subclasses for the fighter.
The fighting man?
The fighter. The fighting man has been changed
they
into
became
the fighter. Oh yeah, finally, because the thing is like, I'm not gonna put any words in any of their mouths. It was a different time, but I would like to assume, I personally would like to assume that they realized that women could play games, and so that's why the fighting man was not a thing anymore.
That was my initial first thought.
Yeah.
But God knows with how people already don't think that women play games. I don't know if that's why.
Yeah.
I think they just realized that it sounded dumb, and so they're like, yeah, fighter sounds better.
That's probably more likely. But hopefully...
anyway.
Yeah, anyway.
So what did the fighting man become the fighter?
The fighting man, now known as the fighter, he could deviate into two different like sub options. If he was like a knight, a defender of order and justice, he could, provided that his wisdom was high enough, potentially become a paladin.
Okay, so paladins kind of join the battle at this point.
Sort of. They were a version of fighters. You had to be a fighter for a little while before you could deviate into paladin. But yes, essentially.
That's something I always hated too. I always hear about, oh, well, I wanted to be this class, so I had to take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this and like wait till I was like 12th level and then I took a little bit of this and then I finally got to be what I wanted to be.
Oh, we'll get there.
So obnoxious.
It's very obnoxious. It's like a little, like, it's classic to me, which is why I find it fascinating, but I also find it immensely annoying. And I'm glad that it's not a thing.
Well, I was gonna say, I'm looking back from only playing 5th edition, so
Right.
It's like, some people probably are in love with that mechanic.
See, I think I hold a little bit of fondness for it because I'm such a huge fan of multi-classing, because I can't stick to one decision virtually ever.
I have like 6 different characters that are just straight shots.
Yep, exactly. I'm like, ugh. Like, I had, like...
And you asked me to take a different, like, dip for something else. You're like, oh, it'd be really cool if you, like, you're a druid, so if you took a little bit of a rogue or something like that, you could get, like, a few different... I'm like, yeah, but then I don't get to be a 20th level druid.
That's true. Yeah. But, like, I don't know. Like, you could do all sorts of fun stuff.
It just feels like I'm wasting my time.
You get to play 2 classes at once.
Nah.
But yeah.
Got a full asset.
Yeah, no, you're right. I respect that. I respect the dedication to the cause. It maybe isn't for me, but I respect it. The other thing that popped up, jumping back to our fighter,
the fighting man.
The fighter, is if they were a like a hunter, a tracker,
this is where the ranger comes in.
The ranger,
my boy.
I think like the ranger here. Let me jump over to. Here we go. It's right here in my notes.
Is it ranger highlighted with a bunch of stars and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I figured we would talk about the ranger a little bit since I know it's your favorite. So being a ranger was very intensive for those who wanted to play First Edition Dungeons and Dragons. First of all, you had to start out as a fighter, and you had to work pretty hard as a fighter. Now, if you wanted to become a ranger, you first had to meet a number of very specific qualifications. You had to have a strength score of 13 or higher.
Okay.
You also needed to have an intelligence score of 13 or higher.
I've done that multiple times.
Also needed to have a wisdom score of 14 or higher.
All right.
And you needed to have a constitution score of 14 or higher.
Jeez.
And for those of you who aren't like big D&D buffs, those are like reasonable numbers. That's like you're pretty much whole ass committing to like, this is the one thing my character is good at. I kind of like am generally good at a bunch of things. The other two like of my statistics, like like these kind of characters didn't have the wiggle room to be particularly dexterous or charming.
Mm-hmm.
Like, period. Which is weird.
Because that's all rangers are now, is they're like, well, not always dex, but they're dexterous strength and...
Right. Like, yeah, because the thing is that, like,
I'm never charming. Like, charisma's my dumb stat. I don't, like, I'm always, like, a 10 or something like that, or lower.
10 or less, yeah.
And people are like, ooh, charisma's important. It's like, fuck you. I don't need charisma to, like, do my job. Like...
Yeah. I don't need to talk to my enemies if they're dead.
Exactly.
But also, on top of that, you had to be good. You had to have a good alignment.
What?
To be a ranger. And so, I know, it seems super weird based on your current concept of the ranger, but consider this. Everything that the ranger is and stands for in First Edition Dungeons and Dragons is entirely based off of the character of Strider or Aragorn from the Lord of the Rings. Like, he referred to himself in the books. I mean, the films, the Peter Jackson films weren't a thing, but like maybe in the animated film that was out around that time, maybe it was the 80s, I don't remember, but like he referred to himself specifically as a ranger. So they were just like, oh, cool. So the ranger wasn't necessarily like, this is a woodlands warrior who like tames beast and like tracks and hunts. the concept of the ranger was this is if you want to play a fighter that is also Aragorn.
Okay.
So, like, they weren't dexterous because Aragorn didn't need to be. He was a dude with a
He
sword,
didn't do bows.
and he swung his sword real hard.
Yeah.
Exactly. Legolas was still a fighter because fighters use bows, and rangers probably didn't really use bows.
That's so weird.
I know. It's very different, like the way that they perceived these classes early on and how they changed over time. But yeah, that was basically how the ranger came to be.
So what edition are we in where we got Rangers and Paladins? Which is weird that they came together too.
I'm pretty sure they
Was that advanced, you said?
That was advanced. That's still first edition.
Okay, so we're still on first edition.
Yeah. First edition is like a lot of the early part of the game. But,
okay.
Pretty much third edition. Like the idea of like a paladin or a ranger, like kind of as we know it today, didn't really come about until third edition.
My God.
Other spin-off classes, we'll go through them like somewhat more quickly. Thieves could be assassins if they were talented enough with poisons and sneaky, and I think they had to specifically be not charismatic. Like I think they had to have a charisma of like 8 or less, and if they were kind of charming, they couldn't be an assassin, which is weird because I guess like their concept of assassin was like assassins are edgy and don't talk to people. So like that. So like if you were too charming, it's like no, you're probably not an assassin. You're like a gentleman thief, like that kind of thing.
A gentleman thief.
Or something like that. Yeah, I don't know what was going through their head. If you were a magic user, still magic user, you weren't wizards yet. You could specialize in illusions and be an illusionist. You had to cut yourself off from I think like 3 other schools of magic permanently, but you could specialize in illusion.
Why would you do that?
Because illusions were really good. You could just make lies exist.
You can do that just by talking. Like, you talk hard enough and you can definitely make people believe your lies. You don't need to, like, get rid of every other good form of magic to fucking make a cool picture. Like...
What if you were bad at talking?
Then don't be a wizard.
That's fair. But yeah, so that was an option. And then for clerics who venerated very specific deities and who drew upon the power of nature and the natural world, they could specialize as druids.
Hey!
And the early druids.
My other son.
That's right. Yeah, your other favorite class. So one of the things that I also should mention too is the way that, and this wasn't true at every table because like kind of early D&D was a minefield. Right. It was kind of just like do whatever you want. Just kind of like make up rules if you don't like certain rules, change them. If you do like certain rules, use them, like customizable. But typically what you would do when you were rolling stats for your character is you would take 3 6-sided dice.
Okay.
You point at your first stat. That one says strength.
Yeah.
You roll the 3 dice. Whatever you got, you write that number down.
Oh.
You go down the list. Which is why these like statistical requirements for certain classes were such a huge pain in the ass. Like imagine you were playing a character and you're like, I want to be a ranger. You rolled strength. Ooh, I rolled a 14. Or no, it was 3. Yeah, you can roll 14.
Good, we're still on the track for being a ranger. They only need a 13.
Cool, you did it. And then you roll your wisdom, like later down the line, and you get, I got another 14. Awesome. And then you roll, super high on your constitution. You got a 17 on constitution. 6, 6, 5. Sweet. It's everything I need to be a ranger. We're good. And then you get to intelligence, and you roll the 3 6-sided dice, and you get a 9. You're done.
You can't be a ranger?
Can't be a ranger. Yep, because you didn't meet the statistical requirements to eventually become a ranger. You are now a fighter. And in fact, because your intelligence was 9, let's say that same character, you wanted to be a magic user, well, your intelligence is 9, so you can't. A lot of people didn't use that rule, but that was like the classic, like hardcore play, like roll 3 6-sided dice, randomly assign them in order to your stats. That was your character. If their stats were bad, they'll probably die soon, and then you can make a new one.
Oh my god.
that was like grognard, like Iron Man style, like old D&D. So with that in mind, special classes that came along later. The monk.
Mm-hmm.
The monk did come into existence. You had to sort of begin as a fighter, and you had to keep in mind those numbers. You're rolling 3 6-sided dice, so
Mm-hmm.
it's not 4 drop the lowest like it is now. Whatever the 3 dice were,
You
you
do
take
3,
it.
you take 3.
Yep, you can get a 3 in a stat, very easily. You had to be a human to be a monk. You had to have a strength score, a wisdom score, and a dexterity score of 15 or higher, and you also needed to have a constitution score of 11.
My God,
If you
that's like
could,
almost impossible.
exactly. And if you couldn't do that, you couldn't be a monk. Needless to say, people don't really talk about monks that much in the earlier editions because not a lot of people were monks.
Right.
Um, and then my baby, my personal favorite.
What, the mystic?
No, not the mystic. Although psionics did kind of exist in the early editions, but still, to this day, nobody had any idea what the hell was going on with them. So most people just ignored them. Um, was the bard.
Oh, the bard finally came
The
around.
bard did come around. So, the requirements for
Oh,
becoming a
God.
bard.
Never mind, the bard didn't come around.
You had to be either a human or half elf. You could be half elf.
Okay.
Yeah, this is later AD&D. You had to have a strength score, dexterity score, wisdom score, and charisma score of 15 or higher.
My God.
You also needed to have an intelligence score of 12 or higher, and your constitution score could not be lower than 10. So you had to have all positive or 0 stat boosts with 4 stats at 15. You had to literally be good at everything to be a bard, and you could only do it if you were a human or a half elf. Then you had to train as a fighter for 5 levels, but no more than 8 levels. Because once you hit level 8 as a fighter, you were too far down the path of a warrior, and you couldn't deviate in your training. It was too late. You had learned too much.
What?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
That sounds like a bunch of bullshit.
But once you are between a 5th and 7th level fighter, you could then deviate from fighter. You then needed to literally hard stop doing anything good that a fighter could do and begin taking training as a thief. Basically reverting yourself into a level 1 thief who could do virtually only what level 1. You could fit yourself into a suit of heavy plate armor, strap on a shield, carry a long sword. You could fire a bow with the rest of them like any other fighter could. But the second you wanted to start training as a bard, you had to be a thief. So you take the armor off, you put the shield away, you throw the weapons aside, pretend like you have no fucking idea how to use them.
Oh my God, that's awful.
You train as a thief until you hit 5th level as a thief. But
so the rest of your party is probably like 10th level.
Oh yeah. Which for a lot of people, that was it. You didn't really make it that far back then. You train as a thief until you were 5th level, but you couldn't go more than 9th level because then you were too far into the path of the thief. It was the same basic idea. Once you had done both of those things, then and only then must you find a clerical teacher who is able to train you in the arts of druidism. So it would have to be a cleric who specialized in druidism.
Okay.
Once you find that, you then had to begin taking 1 level in druid.
Okay.
And once you unlocked that level, you technically were now a bard, and you could use all of your old fighter and thief abilities on top of the new bard abilities. But that was how you became a bard in first edition.
It's so obnoxious.
Mm-hmm.
So I was right. There weren't any bards.
It's kind of like a relic of the old game. It's like the idea of ever surviving long enough to become one was just ridiculous. It was.
There's just no way.
Yeah, which I think is hilarious, but it's also what if you wanted to sing at your opponents?
Well, also, God forbid, by the time you finish all this, your party is potentially fucking 15th or 17th level?
Yeah, I mean, like, you still have, like, HP and stuff. Like, you're still, like, hardy. You just, like,
Well,
don't really
no,
have a lot of,
but like
like,
you get there, your
skills.
party's twice your fucking size,
Yeah.
and also campaigns don't usually go past 20, or
Yeah.
even so, usually like
Back
15.
then, like, most people were dead at, like, 9.
Well, look
Yeah.
even if your party managed to live the whole way through, and even if you managed somehow to get through all of those levels,
Yeah.
your campaign would end.
Oh, yeah.
You'd become a bard, and then the curtain would close.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can just join a theater troupe and live out the rest of your happy days. It's perfect. You have, like,
It's not perfect.
you
It's
have, like, you
awful.
have, like, weird, untold cosmic power and no outlet for it. Maybe a lot of bards became supervillains back then. Like they had like all this new
Probably.
power, and then they're like, well, now I have nothing to do with it. So I guess I'll just like mind control a town or something, or like become a vampire and just like fuck shit up.
Well,
Just
I
for the
mean, with all
fun
the
of it,
fucking effort I went through, yeah, I'm gonna mind control a fucking town.
That's your villain origin story. I worked so hard to become a bard, and then my campaign ended, and now I'm pissed.
And now I'm just gonna become a Lich King. Like, get out of here.
Oh yeah, there you go. See, that's got me keep that in the back of my head. If I ever find myself in a first edition Dungeons and Dragons campaign, there's my angle. That's my arc.
Might as well just do it in 5th edition. It took him so long that he went through all the editions, and now he's finally a bard.
Jeez, absolutely. So there were a couple of other things that I wanted to mention about first edition before we move on to the next version of the game.
Oh my goodness.
Back then, so you know how
We're still on 1st
oh,
edition?
we're still on first edition. Oh yeah. You know how dice rolls were done? Like are done now, like
Yeah, you roll
like,
a d20 and you have your stats. You add your stat to it if you have one,
yeah.
or you subtract if you have one that's bad.
Yeah, if you're proficient in a skill and you have a modifier to that, you roll the relevant skill. Back then, everything was saves. It was a save versus everything. You had a bonus to like certain things. They were very specific things. Like rogues are like, oh yeah, there's like save versus unlocking doors, or save versus traps, or save versus pits,
What the hell?
save versus acid. Like and like you had different things, and you like literally everything, which is like here's your save to this.
Well, I can understand saving against a pit. It's like
Yeah, save. They were usually saves against traps. Like certain classes had like bonuses to their save against traps. Certain ones didn't. And then you just roll and you'd add your number, and then if it beat a certain thing, it's the same basic thing.
right.
But like everything was done in the form of saves, and there were saves to like obscure things. There weren't skills. You didn't really have like skill sets. It's like some people were just good at opening doors, so they had a bonus to save against lockpicking or things like that. There were certain level limitations on some things as a variant rule based on class. Sometimes dwarves couldn't go above 9th level in a certain class because they just they had learned all that they were capable of learning in the art. That was a variant rule that a lot of people, at least from my research, thought was stupid and didn't use, but it was definitely in the player's handbook.
Okay.
And finally, this is my favorite one. Are you familiar with, or have you ever heard of the concept of THACO?
No.
THACO is an acronym.
Okay.
It means 2-hit armor class 0. That was the armor class system. The way that the THACO worked is that every single character, NPC, class, whatever, they had an armor class, and they had a THACO. Your armor class was a number based on your dexterity or your armor you were wearing or just like other abilities that made you harder to hit.
Okay.
Your THACO was like, to my understanding, I guess, like your ability to successfully strike an opponent.
Okay.
In order to determine whether or not you would hit, you would fake 2-hit armor class 0 literally means like it's exactly as it says. It's like to hit an armor class of 0. So you had a number as your THACO, and that is the number you needed to roll as your total to hit someone with an armor class of 0.
And I'm assuming you would just add 1 to each level they had in their actual armor class?
Kind of. You would take the opponent's armor class, whatever their armor class is. You would subtract your THACO. that is the number you need, because it's the hit 0.
Okay.
So you have to subtract your bonus. If you have a negative FACO, you were worse. You were worse at hitting because wait. Yeah, you were worse at hitting because you added that number to your opponent's armor class. If you had a high FACO, you were better at hitting because you were subtracting that number from your opponent's armor class. You would take their armor class, subtract your FACO, that gave you the number minimum you needed to roll on the 20-sided die in order to hit. As an example, an opponent has an armor class of 14.
Okay.
You have a FACO of 6.
Mm-hmm.
So you do that calculation in your head. Their number is 14. Yours is 6. You subtract 6 from their 14, you get 8. That means that in order to hit that opponent, you need to roll an 8 or higher on the 20-sided die. You didn't add anything to the die. You figured out what number you needed to get, and then you just rolled the dice and hoped that number came up. That was it. It was like a really overcomplicated way, and a lot of people complain about FACO for, I think, justifiable reasons, because it's basically just you have to do reverse math ahead of time. And also, like, you kind of, like, as a player, you didn't really know if your dice result was good or bad, if it was in the middle, because, like, the DM knew what the armor class of the monster was, but you didn't necessarily. So, like, you just kind of like, my FACO is this number, and then you roll, and you're like, did I get it? Because they have to do the math for you.
It's a bunch of bullshit.
The kinks in the machine. It's like we're ironing things out as we go. Now, finally, 1989, 10 years later. So I think the kids in Stranger Things were playing first edition.
Probably.
That sounds right.
It sounds right.
Yeah, because I don't think it was 89.
Well, whenever I watch Stranger Things, it's like they're just screaming things into the abyss, and I'm like, okay, this is not how Dungeons and Dragons works today.
Yeah, it was.
Which I didn't figure it would, because it's a show set back in the 80s or whatever.
The chaotic lawlessness of early Dungeons and Dragons. Second edition was when the game was officially released. By this point, like, the whole of second edition was published and designed under no longer just Gary Gygax running it independently. It was purchased by a company called TSR.
Okay.
And TSR was now publishing this new edition of the game. It was meant to be, in this case, kind of just like an addition, an expansion of the first edition rules and mechanics with a different focus. This was the one that kind of like changed the core of the game the least, while adding a different angle to the structure of the game.
Okay.
At the same time that this update was happening, there was this fancy little thing that you may have heard of going on called the Satanic Panic.
Oh,
familiar with this? Yeah. There was
I've seen a few different videos about that kind of thing. There was like
there's a lot of good ones on YouTube.
I've actually seen the JonTron video, which if no one's seen this, like even if you don't like D&D, you should watch this video. I don't know what it's called. I'll have to like link it or something.
Oh, that movie?
That movie some dude made about the girls going to college.
Yeah.
And they're like, if you want to succeed in Dungeons and Dragons, you must give up all of your gold and weapons and like do the satanic ritual and yada yada yada.
Yeah, you had to like invite demons into your heart or something.
Pretty much everyone's aunt was having a panic attack because they thought that their nieces and nephews were sacrificing themselves to the devil.
Oh yeah. There were news articles about it, like small, typically very biblical towns, religious towns, like small town Midwestern, Southern United States mainly, but it kind of was everywhere. Were very big on the concept that Dungeons and Dragons was a game that was teaching you to like worship demons, defy God, and like learn dark spells to become one with Lucifer or something. I don't know, some weird overblown Red Scare level shit. Like
bitch, we're trying to fucking take down the demon lords of like it's not.
Yeah, no, these demons suck. We're trying to kill them. Like, calm down. But because it was in full swing at this time, and people were legitimately concerned with Dungeons and Dragons as a game because they believed that it was making their kids like worship Satan and
Right.
do dark magic and stuff like that, second edition needed to kind of sanitize the game in a very in a way that appeased as many of those people as possible.
Okay.
Did it work? Not really. Eventually, the Satanic Panic just calmed down. But in this version, and especially in the player's handbook, evil alignments
Mm-hmm.
for player characters were actively discouraged. It was strongly suggested that you not play an evil aligned character because evil alignments were bad.
Well, that didn't stick around.
No, it did not. Um, Demons and devils were not in the game.
What?
There were no demons and devils.
Were there
There were
demons and devils before that?
Yes, definitely, absolutely. That was a big part of the game. But demons and devils, as they were, like a lot of the creatures that kind of were demons and devils, didn't necessarily have biblical connotations.
Okay.
So they kind of pivoted away a little bit, and they became like these kind of pseudo monsters that weren't necessarily called demons or devils. Have you ever heard of the terms? They use them in like the game's lore. The terms Tanari,
No, I don't think so.
and then I forget the other one.
It sounds kind of familiar, but
Yeah,
not really any prominent chords.
yeah. Tanari was that one's for demons. There's one for devils, but I forget it. But that term basically was used to describe like a subspecies of demonic entities. Like the Tanari were like this like species of demonic soldiers in the Blood War or something like that. They were just referred to as such, and things with strong demonic overtones were removed. And things that didn't have a very strong demonic overtone but was still technically a demon, they just kind of were like, no, this is a Tanari. It's a six-armed snake lady. She's here.
Put the fucking the Groucho
Groucho
glasses
Marx
on, and then you're
mask.
like,
Yep.
this isn't a demon.
Yeah, that's a six-armed snake lady with swords and a funny glasses. That was pretty much what they had to do.
Completely harmless.
Also, for some reason, because they were just trying to sanitize the game and make it more like morally sound, assassins were no longer playable.
What?
Because they had to be evil.
Oh.
So that was a whole thing. And half orcs weren't playable.
I didn't remember them becoming playable.
Well, that was the thing, is that you kind of could play as a human with like orcish lineage, and they planned to introduce half orcs as like a main part of the game. But then that didn't really happen until later on in second edition.
I see.
They were kind of added.
But then they took them out because they're apparently satanic.
Well, no, they just were intended to be in the base game and didn't get added in until later because the idea of playable half-orcs wasn't a thing.
I looked up that video, by the way. It's called Dark Dungeons.
Oh yeah, because was that the name of the?
That was the name of the
movie?
comic strip that
it was
this
a
guy.
Comic
It was a
strip,
comic
okay.
strip that some guy was either giving away or selling, and then
Sure.
they ended up making it into a video, and it's fucking hilarious. Like, watch John Tron's video on it because it's great.
Yeah, it was very. There was another one too. There was like another movie, not like a video that someone did on a movie, but I think there was like a Dungeons and Dragons movie that had like Tom Hanks in it or something.
I
don't know. I might be wrong. I might be misremembering that, but like there was a lot of funny shit about Satanic Panic era D&D out there. The game was a lot more streamlined at this point.
Okay.
Kind of an adaptation of it. There was a more streamlined progression. No more of the weird dipping in and out of classes to do weird subclass stuff. You just kind of you're a fighter, cool. Here's what it takes to become a level 20 fighter.
Mm-hmm.
It was more like how classes look today. There were no more minimum statistical requirements to enter a class.
Okay.
You were pretty bad at your role. If you were a wizard with an intelligence of 8, you were a terrible wizard.
But you could still do it.
But you could still do it if you wanted to. And there was a much bigger focus, again, kind of in an effort to sanitize the game. There was a much bigger effort and focus on team play. It was very much like, we want you to form a core adventuring group and go out and work together and use the power of friendship to defeat the bad guys. Was kind of the angle of second edition, which kind of like really comes into play a lot more now. Fifth edition borrows a lot of that early emphasis on like teamwork and like team strategy.
To a point where in 5th edition you're not supposed to split the party, otherwise people just like straight up die.
Well, don't split the party has kind of always been a thing, but like it was like nowadays it's a lot more punished, where like back then it's like first edition D&D, you had characters from even like Gygax and the Gents, their team all the time. One guy would go off, do his own thing, steal a secret treasure. Turns out it was like the heart of some ancient god, and he gains untold cosmic power, stuffs it in his pocket, and doesn't tell anybody. Like that kind of thing. Everyone like you benefited from like kind of taking things for yourself in earlier editions. That kind of was done away with in this edition, just to kind of encourage more team togetherness play.
All right.
In an effort to sanitize it, but it also kind of like built the concept of like the adventuring party, as opposed to just a bunch of shitheads with superpowers who got together and decided they wanted to kill God.
Walking in the same direction, so they kind of...
Yeah, exactly. Which, like, you can still do that, but like...
Well, we're currently doing it right now.
Yeah, exactly. It's perfect. This is where the first multi-classing really like came into the game. Bard, as we talked about before, that was kind of an early like step into it, but you kind of couldn't do any of the other abilities.
Right.
Multi-classing was like, now you could actually like hold levels in 2 classes at once, but there were a lot of catches. You had to fully stop leveling in one of your other classes, and you had to deviate entirely into the new class you were multi-classing in. You could not regain access to the abilities that you had given up previously until your next class was close to or equal in level to the previous class.
All right.
You had to literally, like, your multi-classing was a split. You pretty much were like, you were 10 and 10, or you were 5 and 5, and then you picked up with the next class. But once you multi-classed, you had to keep both of the classes close to each other, or else one of them you just didn't practice their abilities enough and you lost them.
Okay.
So once you decided, like, it wasn't like dipping into a class like we do in 5th edition wasn't a thing for multi-classes. It was like,
I want and one and one and one.
I want to be a fighter wizard. Yes, wizard's in the game.
Oh, wizard's finally
yeah, wizard's finally here.
No more magic man.
Yeah, no more magic user. I wanted to be a fighter wizard. It wasn't like, ooh, I'll like pick up shield and magic missile and carry a spellbook around and then be a fighter. It was, I am going to be 10 levels of fighter and 10 levels of wizard at the end of my adventuring career. That's that. And I'm going to muscle my way through. It was basically like every level up, it's like fighter, then wizard, then fighter, then wizard. You just bounce back and forth.
All right.
And what made that even more complicated was that different classes, in an effort to balance out the game, because wizards still remained very strong at high levels.
Was it? Oh, okay, never mind.
Wizards remained strong at high levels. Fighters and thieves kind of fell off. Clerics got pretty strong at higher levels. Pretty much any of the magic users did. You had different experience point totals for different classes. So, like, the experience you needed to level up as a fighter was different than the amount you needed to level up as a wizard. So if you were multi-classing into each of them, you had to know what level you were going to take next, and you had to calculate how much experience points you gained, and once you hit a threshold, you had to decide, okay, I'm taking a fighter level now. Or you could wait and say, wait, maybe I'll take a wizard level, so I need like a couple thousand more experience points.
Right.
And you had to keep track of those 2 separate experience point totals at different times, while also keeping track of your total overall earned experience points. So it was so much math to multi-class for no reason. The first time that proficiencies and abilities were organized into the concept of skills was in 2nd edition as well.
All right.
They had like actual like skills that it's like, I have X bonus to this skill, and so I'm going to roll a die, and then that's where we're at.
No more just saves against everything.
Yeah, not just saves against everything. And this is where the last big thing about second edition that kind of expanded on first edition is like it was pretty much just homebrew settings and Greyhawk in first edition. It was Gygax's world or your world.
Mm-hmm.
Second edition is where most, if not all, of the like major campaign settings that exist today came into being. Second edition saw the existence of the Forgotten Realms.
Hey!
Our beloved Faerun. Dragonlance.
Okay.
In the world of Krynn. Athos in the world of Dark Sun. The very like crapsack, Mad Maxy world is falling apart, the gods are dead kind of world.
Alright.
Planescape, kind of like jumping like between different planes of existence. That was like the planar travel kind of setting. A setting called Birthright that I virtually know nothing about and only heard of in my research.
Alright.
Things like that. And kind of like new fantasy settings and variants of old fantasy settings came into existence around this time. Actually, here's a little fun anecdote for you. Do you remember the first adventure that we ever ran in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons?
It was Lost Mines of Phandelver.
What about the one before that? How did you guys get to Phandalin?
Oh.
On a boat from the Moonshay Isles, right?
Yeah, and we landed on some weird island that had goblins and orcs fighting each other in a civil war, and then it got sunk by a god.
Yep. That was actually in AD&D adventure module called Treasure Hunt.
Oh, yeah, you said something about that.
Yeah, it was intended for 0 level characters, and that was kind of my way to like ease you guys into the core mechanics of the game and teach you what the classes could do by letting you kind of mess around with some of their abilities before you settled on a class.
Right.
That adventure module was printed in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons before Faerun existed.
Where did you say you even got that from? You said you like found
I found a old PDF online on some website. It's kind of hard to find nowadays. But I mean, I'm sure if you searched like Treasure Hunt AD&D module, you'd find the PDF. It's probably like right there, because it's not like anyone makes money off of it unless you have like an old bound copy of it.
Right.
I don't think TSR has the rights to it, but that existed before the Forgotten Realms. When the Forgotten Realms came around, it was either TSR the company or Ed Greenwood the creator of the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah, my boy.
Yeah, he's a cool guy. He or they, the company, liked the idea of that setting so much that they took that module and said, I want that to be a part of the Forgotten Realms, and they just retroactively were like, that old AD&D module, that is the first Forgotten Realms module.
Okay.
So that kind of like was added in.
Well, not anymore.
Well,
at least not for us.
yeah, that's very true. So that was kind of how like that opened up. It became a much more like there were so many different unique worlds you could play in, different settings, different customizations to the game. Like dozens and dozens of source books came into existence around that time. They added more mechanics and more playable races and more like skills and variant rules. That's where you saw like the unearthed arcanas that we know of today as like PDFs they upload to their website.
Right.
Those were like actual books with like new variant rules that they added in like on different levels. And that was just to kind of like add more flavor and interest to the different settings that you could play in. It weren't just this kind of like core Tolkienian style like dark fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
So that was 89. 11 years go by. The satanic panic has drifted into the collective subconscious of other people. The humor still remains. We hit the grand old year of 2000.
Oh, when Cheese was born.
Yeah, when your youngest sister.
Anyone that doesn't know Cheese, she's my youngest sister.
Yes, Cheese is a nickname. That is not her actual birth name.
No, that's her name.
Wouldn't it be hilarious if it was? In 2000, the game had finally been sold, I believe a couple years previously.
To Wizards of the Coast?
Yes, to a Renton, Washington company by the name of Wizards of the Coast. And Wizards of the Coast had finally put together the core 3 rule books and were now releasing their own 3rd edition of Dungeons and Dragons under their company. 3rd edition is my baby in the sense that that is the game that I was brought into this game on. I did not know until much later that I started playing 3rd edition several years after it had stopped being the recent edition.
Oh,
I just thought that was Dungeons and Dragons. Turns out all my friends just didn't like 4th,
I
so they
see.
skipped it. So I was playing like a relic, and that was why the game I think was so intimidating to me at first, because every single source book, and there were so many, there were like 90, I think,
Mm-hmm.
that were in the game were out already. And so you had access to all of them. There were books for absolutely every goddamn thing you could imagine. There was a book of just new rules for fighters. There was a book about people who wanted to live in the woods. There was a book about people who specifically wanted to be a necromancer, but you wanted to be a necromancer in most of the classes. They had like bard necromancers, they had fighter necromancers, they had like warlock necromancers, your cleric and wizard necromancer. They had like all sorts. What was the book like? Libris Mortis, the book of the undead. They had
Oh.
like books for everything because this was the edition where they focused on like customization and like options. The whole that's okay. The whole point of the game was like we just want to give players as many different options as possible. Which also conversely led to it being the most like
Complicated.
ass brain busted game of Dungeons and Dragons in existence. There was virtually no balance by the end of it because different companies and publishers were publishing official material books that had their own mechanics and rules that they came up with. And so how are you going to take like a book about here's like what you can do if you want to play a psionic character, and then here's a book about what you can do if you want to add like cool flourishes to your weapons and kind of do what a wizard can do but like with cool sword techniques. You take those two things and then someone can look at those two books independently and go, oh, here's a feat for psychics that you can take to get cool psychic powers, and then here's this cool sword flourish feat. And it turns out that actually if you take these two feats, because these two companies didn't talk to each other when they made the games and the mechanics, you can take these two feats and put them on the same character with this other feat from the player's handbook, and now this character can like briefly stop time and make 15 attacks.
I see. Is this where the turning? Uh, God, what was that trick? It was like when you like you can like make a wizard and you can like make gold, and then he can like.
Oh, that was just you could do that with like major creation or something. It was like a
Yeah,
fifth
no,
level
but then he
spell.
like takes all the gold and he like does something stupid
Yeah.
to it, and he like makes a black hole and destroys the world. Like, and then the game's over.
That was a different thing. That was the peasant railgun. So okay, so we'll start with the first one that you were talking about was you could use the spell. I think it was creation or major creation. But it was a 5th level spell, so you could do it as a 9th level wizard. You could use it to make like I think it was like a cubic foot volume of an object, and it could be metal. So you could just
Mm-hmm.
like make a cubic foot of gold and then just like crash a local economy and then bounce.
Right.
And you could do that like a lot as a 9th level character. But also the peasant railgun, because of kind of weird wordings about the rules in 3rd edition.
Which is why they're very specific about wordings in 5th edition now.
Yes, very specific. There was kind of like how we have the ready action now, where you can say like, I'm going to do this under these conditions.
I'm going to wait for someone to do this, and once this happens, I do this.
And notice how you have to use your reaction, which is a specified amount of time.
Right.
To then react upon, like, I'm going to use, like, say, hold my action back. And then if it comes up, I use my reaction to then trigger the action.
Right.
Right. So in 3rd edition, it just happened as something called a free action.
Okay.
A free action was the fastest thing you could possibly do. A free action took literally no time.
Okay.
So what you would do is you would take an object that was sort of like a sphere of annihilation. I can't remember what the magic item was, but it was basically like like negative energy condensed into a small orb.
Okay.
Or some other semi-dangerous item of that nature.
Okay.
Or really, I mean, it didn't even have to be that. That made the black hole, but like it could be anything really. And you got like 1,000 people. Typically, it was peasants, and you just put them in a big circle, all holding hands. All of them take the ready action. You probably need to use mind control to convince them to do this, but like it was more a theoretical thing than an actual thing you could do.
Well, that or if you got enough peasants to like you enough, you could probably convince them.
That's probably true. They all stood, yeah, like start a cult, and then you'll get there. They all stand in a circle, and each of them takes the readied action. When I receive an item into my right hand, I pass it to my left hand. And then you just take the thing and just put it right into one of their right hands. This triggers a chain reaction where all of them are now immediately using their free action to take the item they received and passing into their left hand, which should have the right hand of the person next to them on top of it, so it goes into their hand. Because a free action specifically in the game mechanics takes no time.
Yeah.
It all happens instantaneously. So this item starts speed dashing in a circle around this group of peasants, which, if it was negative energy, would open a black hole. If it was anything else, probably creates some sort of like subatomic rift that either, depending on how lenient or insane your DM was, just kind of shreds the flesh off of every peasant nearby and creates a localized tornado, or rips a hole in the space-time continuum and destroys the world.
Right.
This was theoretically doable because of like very loose interpretations of the game mechanics, and that's like an extreme example of the kind of stuff that 3.5 at its third edition, but mainly 3.5 at its apex, like kind of took a little out there.
It's more, I think, that I think they underestimated people's creativity. They gave you a set of rules, and they said, this is what you can do, and they didn't expect people to go fucking apeshit, and then they did, and then they're like, okay, well, with our next edition, we're going to be very careful. We're going to Genie's Wish this entire thing, because we don't want any more peasant black holes.
Yes, that's kind of what they had to do, and we'll see that when we get to 4th edition. But some basic ideas of 3rd edition, like things that I brought up from time to time in our regular conversations. The first like real legit skill system, like you had skills. You would assign points to the skills, and then you, like, when you needed to make a check, you rolled a like I rolled a like. I don't want to give it away because this is related to the thing. You rolled a check.
Okay.
Like a DM would call for a specific skill check. You roll that skill. If it is successful, like based on a DC that they set, then you succeed. Same as it is now. The difference was that there wasn't a proficiency bonus like there is in 5th edition.
Okay.
Every time you leveled up, you got a certain number of skill points that were based on your class, plus your intelligence modifier as extra skill points. So the smarter you were, the more skillful you were.
Okay.
And then you could assign those points to different skills. They were worth 1 point of bonus if they were a proficient skill, which was a skill your class could do, or it was half a point if it was a non-proficient skill, something that was outside of your class's area of expertise.
All right.
Like if you wanted to like make a like what would be an Arcana check, though I don't believe Arcana was a skill. If you wanted to make what would be an Arcana check, but you were a fighter, you could assign points into Arcana, but every 2 points was worth 1 bonus.
I see.
The concept of feats came into the game.
Feats.
Feats, yeah. There were more than 2. Sometimes there were less than 2, depending on what race you were. Anyway, but feats, ha 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 ha.
Well, I was gonna say,
I'll be here all week. But basically how feats work back then. It's not like in 5th edition where like when you hit an ability score upgrade level 4, 8, 12, whatever that may be, you can either increase your stats by a certain amount or you can take a feat, which kind of gives you like feats being, for those of you who don't know, like a special addendum to your class. They're extra skills, extra abilities that you like are training in, that you can use to kind of like diversify your skill set or specialize in a certain thing. Feats were much more cooked into the game of
Mm-hmm.
3rd and 3.5. Uh, a class would, I think it was every 3 levels, you got a feat, like guaranteed.
Oh.
It didn't matter what class or classes you were taking. It was just like every 3 levels you got a feat. If you were a human, you got a bonus feat. Fighters, like instead of having like basically any actual abilities whatsoever, fighters didn't have it. They had an attack bonus, and then every other level they got a bonus feat. That was it. That was the whole class.
All right.
They were good at sticks and learning how to do stuff. Mostly they were only good at learning how to do stuff that required hitting you. But fighters, like feats, were cooked into the system. Magic items were significantly more cooked into the system. The game was designed with the expectation that at certain thresholds in your leveling career, you would receive magic items of various power.
All right.
And if you didn't have X number or X like rough power level of magic items by a certain point, you really felt underpowered. Like you needed to have +1, +2, +3 weapons by a certain point, or you couldn't really deal damage to stuff. You needed to have like enchanted armor. You needed to have like cool staves, capes that helped you fly, like all sorts of stuff like that. And like magic items, like each item had its own like set specific cost, so that like you could buy them in like shops, like they were just everywhere in the game's setting, I guess.
All right.
And multi-classing continued. It was way easier than in previous editions. You literally just like every time you leveled up, it's like you picked what class you wanted to level up in, and then you leveled up in that class.
Okay.
And you kind of like read it like you do now. You take the abilities of the lower level of the thing. If you're taking 1 level in Ranger, you take the abilities listed on the level 1 Ranger tab.
So it became more like current day multi-classing.
Exactly. The only difference was that there was another version of multi-classing.
Okay.
Something called prestige classes.
I've heard of that. I don't think I like those.
Yeah, I mean, like, I loved them, and it was my biggest gripe about 5th edition. Like, I was mad that there weren't prestige classes in the game. Then I played the game for, like, a year, and subclasses are basically just prestige classes. Like, it takes out a lot of the random complexities and nonsense of the game, and just lets you kind of still do the thing you want to do.
Uh-huh.
So, like, I don't miss it that much, but at first I was like, oh, how could they take prestige? Like, it's such a core part of the game, ignoring that it literally wasn't in 4th edition. So, prestige classes were basically like an extra. They usually only were 10 levels as opposed to 20 levels, and they specialized in different things or gave you like unique additional abilities. They had a set of requirements, like you need to have 6 ranks in athletics, or like you need to have like a spellcaster level of 5th or higher, meaning you need to be able to cast 3rd level spells. Those were like requirements for it, and you had to check off those requirements and exceed all of them before you could then take a level in the prestige class. So they usually were only a thing you could do after you were like 5th, 6th, 7th level. Then you could start diving into your prestige class. But very quickly, because of how powerful some of the prestige classes were, the game became about, like, how can I get into this prestige class as quickly as possible so that I can then smash the game mechanics even further.
Right.
There was one prestige class in particular called the Mystic Theurge that was so heavily abused. They were, like, the squishiest class in the game. They had like okay skill proficiencies, garbage attack bonuses. They basically had terrible saves, and like no HP. And they got no other real benefits except every time they leveled up, if you were an arcane spellcaster, probably wizard, and a divine spellcaster, probably cleric at the same time, you leveled up the spellcasting of both classes at the same time, gaining new spells and new spell slots for both of them.
I see.
Over a 10 level class. So then the game became, how quickly can I qualify for Mystic Theurge so that I can then advance my wizard and cleric. Like if I can get in there, like, if I can get in there at level 4, like 2 cleric, 2 wizard, then I take 10 of them and bam, at like 12th level, I have full like or 14th level, I have 12th level wizard casting, 12th level cleric can cast like 1st through 6th level wizard spells, 1st through 6th level cleric spells. I'm like, I can do anything I want. I can heal people, and then in the same breath, I can like delay blast fireball over here. Like, just I'm a machine. And then like other classes came out where it's like, oh, you can take this class, and then it has like a smaller spell list, but like you can go 1 to 9. Like it was for non-spellcasters to pick up spellcasting, but then they could get up to 9th level spells at the end of the 10 class. And they're like, oh, so if I take 2 of these, and then I take this one, and then I take this other one that does the same thing, then I'll take Mystic Theurge, and then I get them both to 10, and then I can just cast Wish and Gate at the same time, like 3 times a day, and it's fine. And I'm also level 18.
Right, so it's kind of broken.
Yeah, exactly. That's an extreme example. So those were kind of like some of the big examples of some of the crazy stuff that happened in that. It's like, I will always have a soft spot in my heart for that edition, but like, oof, sometimes. I have prepared a fun little quiz for you.
Oh God, okay.
This is about 5th edition. Not 5th edition. Sorry. Oh. I know. I just disappointed you.
God damn.
This is about 3rd edition.
I thought I was gonna pass it, and then it became not about.
You might pass it. I believe in you.
All right.
I think you're crafty enough.
I
have 5 questions.
Okay.
They are a group of 3 things. I need you to tell me, of the 3 things that I am about to mention to you, which of the following was not a skill.
Okay.
In 3rd edition.
All right.
So, first one. The craft skill, the profession skill, or the acrobatics skill. Which one was not a skill?
Freaking crafting, acrobatics, or profession. Which one wasn't a skill?
Which one wasn't a skill? Yeah.
They all seem like they would be.
There are no trick questions. One of them is always not a thing.
Crafting, acrobatics, or profession.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say profession, but it just sounds so dumb that it probably would actually be in there.
I'm not giving 3rd edition a very good rap, am I? I'm not a good advocate for my magnum opus, or my alma mater, I guess, in a weird way.
And I want to say acrobat exists because, I guess it was technically a class, and it probably, like, led to athletics. God, I don't know. They had to, you know what, they probably didn't have crafting, because it's something I feel like they should have, but they probably didn't, because why would they have something that actually, like, you know, would make sense and probably make things cooler?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm going to go with, crafting.
Going to go with craft?
Yeah.
That is not the correct answer.
No?
The skill that was not in the game was acrobatics.
No, not the acrobatics.
Acrobatics was... So this is where... I lied. There are trick questions, but not that none of them are the right answer.
Okay.
It's not that none of them are the right answer. It's that sometimes the skill is in the game, just not like that.
Okay.
Acrobatics was not its own skill. Acrobatics was a collection of skills called jump and tumble, I believe. There were separate skill points for being able to jump good and skill points for tumble. Oh, jump, tumble, and balance were the 3 skills that are now known as acrobatics.
Oh my god, okay.
Or sorry, jump went into athletics, but that was part of it. So acrobatics wasn't in the game. Craft, you would pick a thing you could craft, you'd take points in craft. Like, you would take points in craft blacksmithing, or craft underwater basket weaving.
Okay.
And then you would be good at that thing.
Right.
Or profession was like, you would take like profession bartender, and then like you could roll a profession bartender check and take a week, and then like you see how much money your bar made.
Alright,
Yeah,
give me the second question.
Second question. Which of the following is not a 3rd edition skill?
Okay.
Decipher script,
Uh-huh.
disable device,
Okay.
or stealth?
Stealth.
See, now you figured out the game. Correct. Stealth was not a skill. The stealth was actually 2 skills.
Tiptoeing and...
Yeah.
What?
No, I'm kidding. It was called move silently.
Oh my
but
fucking
yes.
god.
That would be so funny though. No, it was hide and move silently. But yes, decipher script was a skill you could use to like read things and tell if things were forged.
Uh-huh.
Although forgery was a separate skill. Like forging things was one skill, deciphering things was a different skill.
Oh my gosh.
And the other one was, what was it? Oh, a disable device. That was for disarming traps.
I see.
3rd one. Spellcraft, fly,
Uh-huh.
or wilderness lore, which was not a skill.
Why would fly be a skill? It probably fucking is.
I just need an answer.
What were they again? What's the first one?
Spellcraft,
Okay.
fly,
Uh-huh.
and wilderness lore.
I'm gonna go with spellcraft because that seems like you should be able, it shouldn't be a skill. That should be like a thing you do with, but I bet you it fucking is, and I bet you fly is the one that's wrong. And if it's wilderness lore, I'm gonna kill. Well,
So what's your final answer?
My first answer is
Which one is your first
what
answer?
the fuck? It's
Spellcraft?
yeah, spellcraft.
Spellcraft. That is not correct.
What the hell?
Spellcraft was a skill.
Okay.
Spellcraft was a roll that you would make to you would make a spellcraft check to determine what a spell was as it was being cast, or to determine the effects that a magical aura was having on an area, and then decipher the spell from that effect.
Okay.
It was also used when you were really high level. You could make spellcraft checks to craft epic magic of your own creation.
Okay, what was the wrong one?
Fly.
Of course
Fly
it
not a
was.
skill. Wilderness lore was a skill. It was actually taken out of the game in 3.5.
And turned into survival.
Yes, exactly. Survival and knowledge nature.
Mm-hmm.
But fly was not a skill in 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons. It was a skill in Pathfinder. It was a skill you would make to if you were flying, you could roll a fly check to see how well you were flying. Yeah.
That should just be like a performance check.
Or something. Or like a dex check. But like stat checks weren't a thing. It was all skills. You didn't make a dexterity check in 3rd edition. You made a skill check.
Okay.
That's why they had a million skills, because you had to cover everything.
Okay.
4th. Concentration.
Uh-huh.
Innuendo. Or perception.
It better be innuendo.
That is not correct.
What the heck?
Innuendo was your ability to like use double speak to like subtly influence
So thieves
people.
can't?
Sure, yeah, something like that. It was like a mix of that and like diplomacy or something.
Oh my gosh.
Actually, perception was the skill.
What?
Perception was actually 2 separate skills. It was
looking around and seeing a lot of stuff.
No, it was spot and listen.
Oh my god. Okay.
Yep, spot and listen were 2
So you
separate
could pass your listen check, but not your spot check, and you're like, I definitely hear something.
Correct. You could also like roll a spot check, and if you don't see anything, then you're like, oh, but do I hear anything? And you can roll a listen check.
That's so dumb.
Yeah. Although some DMs were like, nope, you just don't perceive it, which is why perception was a thing, because why the fuck weren't they the same in the first place?
I don't know.
And finally, the final question.
Mm-hmm.
Scry.
Uh-huh. Which is a spell.
Stabilize self.
Okay.
Or persuasion.
I'm gonna go with scry, because that better not be a check, because it's a freaking spell!
So that is not correct.
I'm gonna...
Scry was a skill you could roll to see how well you could scry on things when you were scrying.
That's so
That was taken out of the game in the third edition. One of the things that happened when they switched over to 3.5 was they kind of condensed a lot of the extraneous, unnecessary rules and like kind of streamlined the game a little bit to make it like approachable. And they took a lot of the really weird skills and squished them together, but definitely not enough of them because Listen and Spot were in the game the whole time. Stabilize Self is your ability to stabilize your own wounds. It eventually would turn into medicine in 5th edition. And Persuasion was actually 2 separate skills. It was diplomacy and bluff.
You can't see it, but I'm rolling my eyes so hard.
I knew that. It's so interesting because, like, as someone who grew up playing 3rd edition, it's so integral to me. But, like, that game was so messy in the later half of it. When it first came out, it was probably super balanced. But I never played that version of the game. I only played the one where there were a million source books and everything was nuts.
Well, that's the thing is I'm used to playing the version where everything's corrected and condensed and like simplified, like. So, of course, looking back, I'm like, that's so complicated and, like, not necessary. And, like, what the heck were they thinking? But, like, back in the day, it was probably, like, one of the coolest things that they'd ever done.
It was so cool. I loved being able to, like, mess around with and customize my characters to an extreme degree and just, like, dive around into different classes and, like, find fun ways to express weird aspects of my character's personality by just, like, mix and matching class skills and abilities and feats and stuff.
Well, see, I'm the kind of person that really makes my character based on the role play. Like,
yes,
they get to they get to pull off cool things and do awesome stuff because of like the things I choose for them. So, like, of course, like with Holly, I made her a ranger. She like was one of the best shots that I've ever made, and like she like took all these cool little things and like was really like decked out. But she wasn't her because she was a ranger. She was definitely her own, like, she was just a person first and foremost, and was like definitely accessorized by her abilities.
Absolutely.
And so just like all that like nitty gritty, like, I think that there's definitely enough room to like wiggle around and like make cool characters with what we have now without just making it absolutely absurd.
See, and I absolutely agree with you. When I first started playing 5th edition, I felt totally the opposite because I was like, I felt like all my customization was getting robbed from me without realizing that, like, that age old adage of restriction breeds creativity is like, that's so true and remains true to this day. Decision paralysis was like the biggest thing for me in 3.5. I just like, I couldn't decide which character I wanted to play because I wanted to play literally every one of the like 400 classes that were in the game. And so like I just played like weird mishmashes of stuff that made no sense and didn't really get a sense of what each of the classes were. But because that's what I grew up in, like that's why my like angle of characterization when like you always like look at me so confused when I'm making characters. I'm like, ooh, I kind of want to like, I want to make a paladin, and then I kind of start from there, and you're just like, what? Like, who? Like, make a person, and then like
fit them into his skin after the fact.
Yeah, and then that's a carryover from that. Like that was how characters kind of, at least for me and my play group, I should say. But like that was how characters were designed. It was very much like, I want to play this class, and then you designed a character that fit the arc you wanted them to take. You made a build first, and then you fit the character to the build.
Well, I do the opposite. I make a person, and then I make them into something that would make sense for them class-wise.
Yeah, exactly. It's 2 different schools of thought that are kind of built off of the edition you started on, you know? As a fun little thing before we dive into the relatively short bit of knowledge that I have about 4th edition, do you want to know what my... so, for those of you who don't know, I have a character from our previous campaign where the Holly she previously mentioned was also a player character. My dearly beloved Luciano. Who is Holly despises him and finds him so annoying and ostentatious. But I love that character so much. Do you want to know what Luciano's 1 through 20 classes were in 3.5? Keep in mind, he used that campaign had ended previously. He used the now defunct Mystic class from the Honor Arcana because he was a psychic, sort of, in the previous edition of the game. So he was like a rogue mystic. That was it. I had 1 level in rogue and I was a mystic. I was pretty much straight classed in 5th edition.
and 3.5.
Uh-huh.
And these classes are probably going to make absolutely no sense to you at all. He had 6 levels in Factotum,
All right.
which is like a jack of all trades class. 1 level in Rogue.
Uh-huh.
1 level in Water and Travel Domain Cleric. 2 levels in Chaos Monk. 2 levels in Chameleon, which let him borrow other class features from places. 1 level in Exemplar, which made him a Master of Skills. This was a prestige class, same with Chameleon. 3 levels in Uncanny Trickster, which gave him fun tricks he could do with skills while also advancing the abilities of a different class. And 4 levels in Scion, which gave him psychic abilities, kind of like a psychic wizard. That was him.
Pretentious.
And yeah, exactly. Way over the top, totally unnecessary. The character made no sense for the first half of his career because I was juggling like 800 features. And in 5th edition, I made him as a single class character with a 1 level dip in Rogue. And that was
and it kind of accomplished the same
and
thing.
He did basically the same thing, but way less dumb for most of his career. Like I actually played him as a person instead of just like getting to my turn and like flipping through 7 pages of class features, just being like, what the hell can I do? Joe used to make so much fun of me because he played a fighter.
Good, I'm glad he made fun of you.
Yeah, he played a fighter, and so his turns were I'm gonna hit stuff, and he was so good at that. And my turns took 15 minutes.
You're literally that meme where they're like, okay, it's Ken's turn. I'm gonna go bake a fucking cake. I'll be back.
That was, yeah. Shout out to Joe. I still deserved every bit of the flack that I got for my 8,000 year turns for Luciano. Sorry for making you wait so long between initiative rolls, bud.
No, if you did that to me, I would hit you. Every minute I had to wait for you, I would hit you with a book.
Just throw books at me from across the table.
Like, you better hurry up because eventually you'll be in a pile.
I mean, I could build a hoard of books. I can make that happen.
Not on your turn.
Oh yeah, not on my turn. I'd be too busy figuring out what the hell my character does. Okay, so
4th edition.
4th edition, finally. I actually don't know when 4th edition came out. I could have researched it, but I sort of like the mystique of the fact that like I never really knew. Like it was the version of the game that was recent when I started playing, but like. It never really was on my radar. It wasn't the
Did you ever play it?
I have the 4th edition player's handbook.
That wasn't my question.
Vivian's father was cleaning out someone's house for some reason, and there were 2 4th edition player's handbooks in the house
that they tossed in there because he didn't want them.
Yeah, like he probably didn't want, but he like wanted one of them. And he's like, oh, I don't know what the other one is, so like I don't want it. And so her dad was like, oh, well, my daughter plays Dungeons and Dragons, so I'll just give it to her. And so she got it and then gave it to me, I guess. So now I have it. It was a complete and total overhaul of the game, like as a whole. It was no longer like the not imaginative. It was imaginative. It wasn't like the like theater of the mind. Like sometimes you play on a battle map, but like mostly you just kind of like talk about what's going on, and then everyone asks you questions about where they are, and it's all going on in your brain. That was virtually impossible in 4th edition, which was kind of on its core designed to be a miniatures battle map, like almost tactical game.
Okay.
It was more like an MMO, like a World of Warcraft style game than like a tabletop. It was less of an emphasis on role playing, though role playing did still exist, and more of an emphasis on like being a battle game.
Altogether kind of sounds like a step backward.
Yeah, especially if you're a big fan of role playing, and that was why I wasn't super into it. It was very big in like the battle map, like terrain map, like the kind of people that like enjoyed like Warhammer and things like that. It's kind of big for them, but not really so much for me.
Right.
It was very much about like they put a hard stop on the like crazy unbalanced like all over the place nonsense of third edition,
Uh-huh.
and they were like, we need to stop this from getting out of control. And so when fourth edition came out, they kind of had they had like all of the classes pretty much evolved along the same path. They all got abilities from a giant list that they could choose from at set levels,
Mm-hmm.
and you could customize your character by selecting certain abilities. They were all basically combat abilities. It was like, here is an attack I can use that you roll this type of an attack and you add this bonus, and it deals X number of dice of damage and also provides a status effect. Like clerics could get like a holy strike that like blinded the opponent for one turn, or they could get like a long range like life transference that like dealt damage to this target and then gave that much healing to an ally. It was all like a very tactical, like here are the hard mechanical limits of your abilities, and you had to kind of customize your character like you were building them down like an RPG skill tree.
Right.
You were picking your individual abilities that you were becoming good at as you leveled up. Every ability was divided into 3 different types of powers. There were at will powers, encounter powers, and daily powers. At will could be used anytime. Those are your basic bread and butter core of your class. That was magic missile for wizards. That was healing word for clerics. It was like dashing attack or spinning attack for fighters, like things like that, like just like the basic bread and butter tactical abilities of your class. Encounter powers could be used once per encounter. There weren't spell slots, you just had a certain number of encounter powers. And then there were daily powers, once a day, that's it. Then you had to long rest in order to use it again. The classes pull all of their abilities from lists, and each of them have very defined roles. A bard would have been a supporter, and so they gain abilities that help them support the party, and their role in the party is as a supporter. If you have too many supporters in the party, then your party was unbalanced. If you very much wanted to design it like you were like structuring a true adventuring party, it was like an MMO. You kind of needed a tank. You needed someone who could crowd control. You needed a supporter. You needed a healer. You needed a DPS, someone who could deal damage quickly. Monks were kind of like DPSs. Paladins and fighters were tanks. There were like commanders, like the warlord was a base player class in this, and they were kind of like fighters who like could lead the charge in battle and could like bolster their allies and like bring them into the forefront. They were kind of like the party face.
I see.
That kind of a thing. Basically, miniatures were mandatory. To the point where movement was no longer measured in feet. They were literally measured in squares.
Oh.
Like, oh, you're a cleric with heavy armor, you can move 4 squares.
Oh.
That's your movement speed.
Okay.
So, like, I mean, squares were still 5 feet. You could divulge that, but, like, it wasn't listed as, like, feet.
It was listed in squares.
Yeah, because, like, the intent was this game is going to be played on a square grid or hex grid battle.
Okay.
Combat tactics and like the general flow of an encounter in Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition was like, think like Final Fantasy Tactics or Fire Emblem.
Okay.
You moved around the square, you put your characters near each other, them being close to each other like had different benefits for each other because you could support your allies. And it was all about like moving further along the battle map and reaching the enemy at the end.
Okay.
The game was, they had this system called minions, which were like, there was a boss monster, like let's say you're like in the Underdark, and it's like, here's like, oh, this like big nasty Drider queen, and like here are a bunch of like drow, and then the drow were minions. Minions flooded the battlefield. There were usually like 20, 30 of them, something like that. The rule for minions was if you hit them, they died.
Oh.
But they existed just kind of like to make the battle seem more threatening and force you to use up your resources before you reached the boss.
Okay.
So, like, a lot of times, like, you'd be fighting, like, oh, I'm fighting, like, a dragon and 30 kobold minions. And you just had to, like, smash through the waves of fodder early on before the dragon could, like, set up its resources.
Right.
But it was very much,
A time waster.
yeah, it was like, it was very balanced in the sense that, like, all the classes could contribute to the party. Everybody was kind of doing their own thing. Nobody felt like they were falling behind. It fixed that aspect of, like, linear wizard or linear fighters, quadratic wizards from third edition, where, like, wizards started off a little weaker and then became unkillable gods, and fighters pretty much just sucked the whole way through. Fighters were basically unplayable in third edition. Is balance them all out. You didn't feel like you couldn't do anything if you picked the wrong class. But at the cost of that, combat tended to be a little bit monotonous, tended to be very repetitive. There wasn't a lot of angle for role playing in the game just because, like, the game had to contain a set amount of combat in it to function.
Okay.
So, like, you couldn't really have a session of 4th edition D&D where anyone contributed anything or rolled dice if you didn't have at least a couple combat encounters planned for every game.
Alrighty.
And combat tended to take much longer. It was like the
bread and butter of the game.
Exactly. So balance at the cost of a lot of the role playing and exploration pillar of the game. Some weird things about their player's handbook. That was the first time that the Warlock was added as a base class from the beginning of the game. Warlock had never been like a main class in the game. It added a new class called the Warlord, which, like I said, they were kind of like the battlefield leader, something like in between a fighter and a paladin. It didn't come back for 5th edition because it kind of wasn't really necessary, but it fit the mechanics of 4th edition really well. But the first player's handbook, there were multiple. They had kind of every couple of years they released a new set of core books, like Player's Handbook 2, Dungeon Master's Guide 2, Monster Manual 2, to kind of add more things into the game, kind of like expansion packs in an MMO.
Right.
But the Barbarian, the Druid, the Monk, the Bard, and the Sorcerer were not in Player's Handbook 1. Those classes were actually removed from the game until a couple of years, I think, at least a year, but probably a couple of years into 4th edition.
I could see why people think this game was such trash.
Yeah, it was like you pretty much just kind of like you were a tank, a healer, or a DPS, and you pretty much were just playing World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
Like, and that's kind of it. However, there were a lot of things that 4th edition did that ended up in 5th edition that are, like, really integral to it. The concept of healing surges. Classes in 4th edition could spend a healing surge, and they could roll a set amount of hit dice and then heal that much. That turned into the short rest.
Okay.
Proficiency bonus applying to things. That was in 4th edition.
Oh.
The proficiency bonus came into play there. That's the first time it was used. The concept of a short and a long rest, it wasn't in the game until 4th edition. You couldn't short rest to heal a little bit or long rest to regain your daily powers. In the past, it was just like you need to sleep for 8 hours. Or like you can like lay down, but you can't heal without healing magic.
Right.
And then those at will powers that you could use over and over again, those were the encounter powers, or no, the at will powers. Those turned into like at will cantrips. Can't use to have like I have 5 cantrip slots, so I can cast 5 cantrips today.
Oh, geez.
That was in 3rd edition. Yeah. Now cantrips were just like you can just use these. I think it technically started in Pathfinder. Which was like a spin-off of it. Like, Pathfinder came into existence because people didn't really want to play 4th. Like, they're really, like, hardcore 3.5 guys. So they kind of kept playing Pathfinder instead of jumping onto 4th.
Right.
But other than that, like, that was pretty much the core of the game, at least to the degree of what I know about it. It was pretty much just like a tabletop war game, like kind of going back to like the proto roots of D&D, where you played with miniatures as opposed to like a full-on role-playing game.
Honestly, it's like it gave you a few good mechanics, but you like to go to 5th edition, you had to like put all the good shit back in and then just
Mhm.
keep some of the mechanics and like not overpower people.
That was basically it. Like 4th edition was a great way to like put a hard stop and deflate the unbalance of like that crept in through 3rd edition. But then you kind of needed to add back in like the spicy role playing fun. Otherwise, it was just kind of like a weird. You were just playing World of Warcraft.
Right.
So yeah, I mean that brings us to 5th edition.
Well, yeah.
Um,
Which I'm sure we'll talk about more in the future because
oh,
that's.
I would love to. But yeah, so that I guess that kind of ends our walkthrough of the history of earlier editions of Dungeons and Dragons. Next time that we hear from y'all, Hannah's going to have a fun little topic that I know nothing about, and I'm very excited about, I'm sure. So stay tuned for that. Otherwise, we don't have a sign off yet?
We still don't have a sign off, but thanks for teaching me all the past stuff of Dungeons and Dragons. I definitely knew a little bit, but definitely not a lot of that stuff.
Oh, of course. It's like it's such the older version of the game. They're so weird, but like they hold a special place in my heart, and I'm glad that I got to see your reactions to like some of the just like absolutely upside down stuff that we take for granted now that we're like established 5th edition players, but like some of the old stuff was just so weird. Anyway, thanks for listening to us chat today. We hope to see you again soon. If you have any cool topics you want us to talk about, make sure to comment.
Or anything to throw in about any of the things we missed.
Oh yeah, if I got any of my facts wrong, let me know because I only really did a lot of research on 3rd edition because I like it, and then I ended up ranting about it a lot. So if you have anything you want to add or anything you want us to talk about, feel free to leave it in the comments or send us a message on our socials or anything. We'll get that email set up, and if we do, we can add it into the little topic,
Doobly-doo.
the doobly doo. That's what people call it on YouTube. Wow, we're like real YouTubers now.
No. But yeah, until next time when I come back with my topic, we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you very much, and have yourself a lovely day.
Bye.